Okay, we're gonna get started with our last session here in the home stretch. All right. So over the past 2 days, we've heard a lot about what it takes to get nuclear projects off the ground. But one element we've skirted around a little bit, and several other speakers have touched on, is about working with communities and building trust in nuclear projects. This last session will examine how to overcome some of those challenges and have some of those conversations. I'll turn it over for introductions. Maybe we'll start with Stephanie.
Well, thank you so much for having me. We had a Washington State contingency here for an INL tour. It just worked out really well for me to be here, so thanks so much. I feel it's a privilege to be a member of the Washington State House of Representatives, and it was a goal of mine coming from the Tri-Cities, Washington, that's Pasco, Kennewick, and Richland, the home of the Manhattan Project, the home of the Columbia Generating Station, the home of the 4 lower Snake River dams. We are very energy centric, and part of what we've been trying to do in the Tri-Cities for years is bring a small modular reactor to the Hanford Nuclear Reservation. We're in the process of, excuse me, cleanup at Hanford, as you all know, and we're sick and tired of being known as the armpit of Washington or the armpit of the United States. We don't want to be known just for that waste, that legacy waste from the Manhattan Project. We want to be known as a clean energy hub for the Pacific Northwest. And so that was our goal. My background is not in nuclear, it's in economic development. And so when I first got elected to the House of Representatives, my #1 goal for going was to bring an SMR to the Tri-Cities. And that started on the day that I was elected in 2022. And I founded the Washington State Legislative Nuclear Energy Caucus. First of its kind of an ad hoc committee. It's not a statutory committee, but just built a program. Basically, it's just a lunch and learn. Every other week during session, we have someone come in and give us a 40-minute presentation and have 10 minutes of Q&A, and we eat pizza and drink soda. And that happens every 2 weeks in our legislative session. And then during interim, we do 2 tours. We usually do a Puget Sound tour, which includes companies like UltraSafe, TerraPower, Helion, Zap, Avalanche. So we do include fission and fusion in the mix. And then we have a Richland tour usually that includes Framatome. This year it included General Matter. We have the Columbia Generating Station, obviously. And a lot of the times we take them out to the site, the Hanford site, and show them the vitrification plant if they want, and also the B reactor, which is historical. So it's something that we've done. We've never gone out of state, but this year we came to INL and blew our minds completely. It was so incredibly impressive. And we also have PNNL, a laboratory, national laboratory. So we boast that as well in the Tri-Cities. Really looking forward to getting a project up and running in the Tri-Cities.
Excellent. We made it. The last session of a inspiring day and a half of discussions. Just shout out and thank you to the WGA and particularly Governor Cox for your leadership and an important discussion, really an inspiring discussion. I was pretty fired up here in that last panel, and you could see the passion, the enthusiasm, momentum that sort of builds in the room. Introductions, my name is Steve Kiser. I'm a Senior Vice President and Global Energy Sector Lead for WSP. If you're not familiar with WSP, we are one of, if not the largest professional services companies in the world, about 74,000 professionals globally, almost 20,000 professionals in the US. The power and energy sector is one of our 4 core business lines. To show that commitment to the power and energy space, we're proud to have recently acquired Power Engineers, 4,000 professionals in that power space. It happens to be Idaho based with a very strong presence in the West. So we're super excited to bring their talent into the WSP family. WSP has a long history in the nuclear space. We've been active in this industry, quite honestly, helping to build a lot of the first reactors, 50 and 60 years ago. That history has continued. I won't mention the different R words that we talked about yesterday, but me personally, I've gotten involved. I'm an engineer by training, but here I am talking on a panel about public trust. Go figure. But I first got started in the nuclear space in the early 2000s with some of the large-scale reactors and the licensing and permitting. WSP is proud. We supported 19 of those applications that went to the NRC for the large-scale reactor. So highly experienced in that front-end engineering, environmental advisory space for all things power and energy, but in particular nuclear. Here recently, we have supported or are supporting 12 SMR projects across the U.S. We're hopeful this week we'll hear about our 13th and maybe even 14th projects. So there is a lot of activity going on in the U.S. We're supporting another 12, maybe 15 globally. So I do work quite a bit with our global colleagues, and it's just interesting seeing the comparison and the approach and where things stand in the industry. So just excited to be a part of the panel discussion today and see how we can enhance that public trust.
Morning, everyone. We would have to test that out. I'm Hope Morrow. I've kind of been wearing two hats here today. My day job, I'm the head of all workforce and economic development activities here at Idaho National Laboratory. So thank you all for joining us on a sunny Idaho Falls. I think we had 2 days of sun, so you guys got the best of it. Don't come back till May. And then in my other capacity, I'm a co-founder and the co-chair of the Idaho Advanced Energy Consortium, which is a 501c6 here in the state of Idaho. That at its core, the charge of the consortium is to really kind of drive those deployments, right? Any of those advanced energy technologies, those companies that are seeking to locate in the Idaho area, connect to the national laboratory, the supply chain markets, the workforce, et cetera. I think we all enter into the energy industry in different ways. I happen to be an economist, so I came from an economics background. I was a labor economist for the state of Idaho and the state of Utah for a number of months before the laboratory called and said, hey, as we heard on the last panel, we need to start thinking about workforce in a slightly different way, more proactively. Can we forecast that? Can we start thinking about what the future of the energy workforce, not just for Idaho National Laboratory, but for the entire industry looks like? And I said, we sure can. So I left Utah after 6 wonderful months, moved back up to Idaho Falls, and I've been in Idaho ever since. So now in my role with both the laboratory and the consortium, it's this, connectivity between recognizing what the state and the communities want, both for their economy and for their people, what good growth looks like for them, being able to forecast and remove barriers to those workforce pipelines, and then also being thoughtful about how to onboard the energy industry into the Rocky Mountain West. What does that mean from a supply chain perspective? And if you aren't bringing the public along, i.e. having them kind of at the center of all these discussions, then you're not building that public trust, right? And so making sure that you are walking through those stages with your small rural communities to your larger metropolitan areas, and figuring out what that good growth looks like, and having that data-driven background to be articulate in what can and can't work potentially, or what would have to happen to make certain projects function properly, really is at the core of what we do. So I've found my passion work. I love being in the energy industry. It's a really nice kind of cross between economics and getting to be part of, I think, probably the most interesting industry in the States now. So.
Okay. Yeah, I know it may be no secret that nuclear energy could use some demystifying. So I guess to start, what do you see as some of the primary reasons for the distrust or lack of support that we're seeing for nuclear projects, especially in Western communities? How much of this do you think stems from experience or historical accidents versus lack of education or misinformation?
Yeah, happy to take that one on. So I'm in a heavy blue state, and while I don't want to get partisan here, the Democrats have control of the House, the Senate, the governor's office, and some would say the state Supreme Court. But we And so there is a lot of, I call it the China syndrome effect. Thanks to that propaganda film, set us back a long way. Plus, we have, the Manhattan Project and the waste that came from that. That has scared our community and this entire state. I remember when I grew up in Seattle, and when my husband at the time said, "Hey, I want to move to the Tri-Cities. What do you think?" Like, no way. I will go for 2 years, but I don't want to put our roots down there. I don't want to have a family there. I don't want to be a downwinder. There's a lot of terrible stuff out there. There's this nuclear, a big, huge energy system out there, and I don't want to have this affect my children. And so I'm the one that ended up taking a deep dive into it. But really, for the most part, it's the divide between the west side and the east side. So you have those of us that are close to the reactor and the Hanford cleanup site, which gets conflated constantly. The different types of waste, from legacy waste to the nuclear energy waste. And that is extremely difficult to overcome. The safety issue, that's a huge issue. I mean, I wasn't opposed to nuclear, but I certainly didn't want to raise a family in the Tri-Cities because of that. So there is this kind of inherent ingrown, and I think, all of us know we blame the Simpsons, we blame, the China syndrome, we blame the accidents. You can talk about Chernobyl and Fukushima all you want, 3 Mile Island. I can remember my very first day in the legislature. Actually, it was before my very first day, when we were getting some training done, and we had to sit by someone on the other side of the aisle. And I can remember him saying, we had to ask each other, one of our things that we had to do in this training was talk to the other person on the other side of the aisle about what your goal was, why you were in the legislature. And I said, well, I want to bring an SMR. I'd like to see nuclear power and advanced nuclear in Washington State. And he said, I have 3 words for you: 3 Mile Island. And that was his response. Like, I'm not going to talk about it anymore. It's over. It's a non-starter. So I knew there was a ton of work to do. And that's just, that's what started that process of really trying to develop some trust. First, we have to squelch the idea of the safety issue. And we have to also draw a very clear line of demarcation between legacy waste and spent fuel. What is that? How do you explain that? What are the benefits that could come from advanced fuel, from advanced nuclear, or from the Columbia Generating Station? What does that bring to our community, not detract? So we have to make that separation very clear, and it starts with the community that you live in. And for me, the Tri-Cities, it's pretty easy. I don't think we have any NIMBYs there, because they live so close to the Columbia Generating Station in Hanford. They get it. And all their friends work in the industry in one way or another. So they really understand nuclear, but it's outside of Eastern Washington, and that's south central part of Washington. It's Western Washington, the heart of Seattle, that really, really is terrified of this. So it takes a lot of work.
And I guess outside of folks who maybe have experience or have knowledge about nuclear, what does that conversation look like in communities where maybe they don't have that same historical knowledge or background?
Yeah, and I'll add to that. And by the way, I love that you brought up The Simpsons, one of my favorite shows, but that is also very irritating when you see the things glowing green and the dogs with 3 heads and what have you, but it doesn't help.
No.
And yeah, we can point to Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island and some of the sensationalized things, but I would argue that it starts closer to home also. And to your point, there's communities that don't have nuclear, and you look at where they get their sources of information. And I'm going to share a story. I told my daughter I probably wouldn't tell a story, but I'm going to anyway. She's my youngest daughter. She's a high school senior this year. Last year as a junior, she took a class called AP Environmental Science. And one of the sessions they cover was on energy and energy creation and production, and just kind of a pros and cons. And she took it, that session was about a year ago. So in preparation for this panel, I asked her, what do you remember about that class, just in general, and in particular with nuclear? And the thing she brought up was nuclear accidents, 3 Mile Island, the big parabolic cooling towers with, I believe she said the poisonous smoke that's coming out of that, which is completely inaccurate, but and then the high cost. And I said, well, what about solar and wind? And it was clean energy, and they're cheap and quick, and all the positives. And nuclear was negative, 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 negative. And maybe that's a function of our education system, but I look at that as going back to the previous panel, talking about this younger generation and their passion and enthusiasm that changed the world mentality. And it starts right there. And as a high school junior, I think they were talking about a 5th grader that was involved in some projects that are now starting to enter the workforce and join their companies. But how do we transform that education system at an early age? How do we take some of those sensationalized events? I think the governor made a point yesterday about 3 Mile Island, and it worked. Yes, it was a high-profile incident, but the safety systems worked. Plant Vogel, obviously well publicized about the challenges and cost overruns and years behind schedule. And my goodness, people went to jail over that project. But have we told the story like yesterday on the panel that Unit 4 was 40% cheaper than Unit 3? So there's a lot of positives that we can continue to promote. And I think it starts at a very early age. It starts close to home. And in particular, some of those communities that don't have nuclear as a part of their history and their background, looking at those sources of information where they hear about things.
I would add that we have a lot of demystifying to do. We have a lot of educating to do. The avenue in which we do that, right? We have to hit all of them. I think that's information we all have. I think an approach that has worked in Idaho in particular is whatever that community needs at that time. If the energy industry has a solution in it for that community, it's very easy to educate if you're also building that solution into the conversation. So if you have a community that's a rural community that's going, we need a more sustainable economy. How do we diversify our industry mix? How do we grab a handful more jobs that are, good family wage jobs, et cetera? It's very simple for us to talk about how the energy industry is a potential solution to some of those problems that they're faced with every day, right? That is their charge as a, county commissioner or a mayor or what have you, is to make sure that society and their community is better, that there are great jobs for the people that want to live and work there. And so we use that avenue often to educate, to say, this is an opportunity in this component of the supply chain in the nuclear industry. And then it opens up the door for all of those questions. Well, what about the safety? What about this? What about the timeline? What about the cost? And then they're the one asking, which I think makes a big difference. I think all 3 of us probably spend a lot of time talking. And oftentimes people listen, oftentimes they don't because they have other things to do in their day. But when people are asking us the questions, when they're saying, okay, I can see how that's a potential solution, but here are all of my concerns, sometimes the listening gets better when the conversation goes in that direction. So I would say, we have a ton of things to do, alter education, have all these conversations. If there's a way to bring the energy industry education in as a solution to some things that they're bringing to the table, it can bridge that gap really nicely.
One thing, just real quick, I want to bring up is that argument, you would think that would work. The economic benefits doesn't really work in Washington. It just doesn't. That's not the argument. The argument is decarbonization, deep decarbonization. The argument is this is how we will get from here to our CETA goals, our Clean Energy Transformation Act goals, and our from 2021, our State Clean Energy Strategy and our Climate Commitment Act. This is how Washington State is going to meet our climate goals, not just goals, climate mandates, requirements. So this is how you get there. If there is no roadmap already, then and there isn't truly, this is how you can get from point A to point B. So that's the selling point. I know in one of the things we do that has been done in the Nuclear Energy Caucus is I focus mainly on Democrats because I feel like the Republicans, it's being used as a political football. this advanced nuclear is more of a Republican energy, just is so dumb that we have that. And then renewables are more of the Democrat, the liberal environmental type energy. And I refuse to conform to that. So what we do is we'll say, okay, who can we get to come out here? And so we asked former Secretary of Energy Ernest Moniz, Dr. Moniz, to come out and say and teach, and we had a reception for him that night. That was the best attended Nuclear Energy Caucus lunch and learn we'd ever had. But it was a Democrat talking to Democrats. And so when I do send out those invites, I try to find a picture of, Ernest Moniz, Dr. Moniz with President Clinton, and I'll put that in the background, and here I am, a Republican, like taking around the Clinton photo and saying, look, this is Dr. Ernest Moniz, and Secretary, the Energy Czar, Carol Browner for Barack Obama. I took a picture around of her with Joe Biden and President Obama. And that was the invitation. And I just took them to each of the Democrat legislators, and we got those in their mailboxes. And that was the second best well-attended Nuclear Energy Caucus we ever had. It's come one, come all. You don't have to be a member of the Nuclear Energy Caucus. You just self-identify as a member of this caucus if you want to learn. So you have to have something for them that's going to interest them. You can't have the Republicans pontificating and the well-known Republicans that support nuclear talking about it. And it really does come from your leadership. I have found that more Democrats have supported nuclear in the face of, they've been very brave. They've been very courageous in voting for nuclear, even though they know their contingency, their constituents are not going to be pleased with that vote because they just don't know about it enough yet. But they are being brave, and they are going down that road because they understand it. So it's top down too, not just from the youth. We have to take that leadership role and help them, give them reasons. We have to give them reasons that they can vote yes, instead of always just playing the safe thing by saying no.
And you mentioned the Nuclear Energy Caucus. A lot of other folks this week have talked about different forms of partnerships and coalition building. But really, from sort of a messaging standpoint, how can we get project developers, policymakers, other stakeholders to sort of coalesce around the same message around nuclear energy?
I would say that, first and foremost, raising your hand, right, is important to say whatever group you represent, whether that's an industry mix, a state, a group of elected officials, et cetera, saying that we're passionate about this thing. We want it here, or here are the benefits of doing that. Raising your hand, I think, is one of those first steps. Then you can set that stage for what are the benefits, or why are we bringing this to the table. And I think that looks different everywhere you are. I think, to the representative's point, what Washington State needs and their concerns are very different from what Idaho State needs, or Utah, or et cetera. And so meeting those people where they're at, our people where they're at, with their concerns is exactly how you build that public trust. I also think that the messaging part is that exact same sentiment, right? If you are messaging to the entire country, then you have this mixed match of concerns and needs and desires. So if you can isolate your audience to the best of your ability, or have a series of strategies to isolate those audiences, to target them, to bring that attention to those topics, to say, this is why we care about nuclear energy, or this is how nuclear energy is going to get you to XYZ goal, then hopefully, right, you're assimilating to them as quickly as possible. But I certainly think that raising your hand piece is really important. Governor Cox's the shorts thing, I'm never going to be able to forget it. But it's that idea where it's kind of been in the background for a really long time, right? Nuclear energy and the industry has been living behind us or around us quietly for 50 plus years. And now we're all going to have to be brave or be more vocal where we haven't in the past, and finding the right avenues to do that without oversaturating the market is a very fine balance, and one that we all have to strike in our respective ways.
Great point. I love that it's, meeting people where they're at and understanding what's important to them, because it is going to vary, location to location. And I mentioned in my introductory comments at WSP, we've had the good fortune of being involved in 12 SMR development projects in the last 5 or 6 years. So we've really had a front row seat on the public engagement, or in some cases the lack thereof, and how that has worked. And I think that's a great point as far as understanding what's important to the community and how to engage with them and really provide the facts. I mean, I love this saying, facts are your friends. And if you don't present those facts, they're going to fill that void with something. And it's usually something on the negative. But one project in particular is being developed in a community that was not very supportive of nuclear power. And this particular client worked very, very hard to engage the community. They had about 6 or 7 public meetings. They invited local and state politicians to these meetings. They had an open session for members of the media just to hear the story of what the development was going to look like, impacts, job creation, economic benefits, impacts to their power bill and how much they pay for their power. The very first one of those meetings had 100 people in person, plus I'm not sure how many more online. By the time we got to that 5th and the 6th one, actually the last one we participated in about a month ago, had 0 people in attendance in person, which some may say, well, that's bad. But through the series of the education, they had answered all their questions, and they had a dozen people online, but no questions came in online. To me, that was a win. That was a success. But they really worked hard to engage that community, to hear their concerns, incorporate those concerns into the project development process. So there's material changes they have made to the overall project based on some of the feedback. And to me, that was a success. That was a win. It took a lot of work, and it took a lot of listening and understanding what was important to them. And conversely, we've seen clients that have very little public engagement, and the projects are struggling to get that local support, and it leads to things like the previous panel talking about the job creation in the workforce and where you're going to get your people. And hopefully a lot of that comes from the local communities, but if you don't have their support, you're off to a tough start.
Well, in addition to sort of that front end support building, when you're looking to develop a project, how do you ensure that communication and buy-in from the community is retained through the life of the project? What does that continual engagement look like?
Sorry.
I was just going to say, if you can create that foundation before the project shows up, that's really great, right? If you can be talking about the energy industry or the nuclear energy industry with those communities way before there's a potential SMR in their backyard, you're in a way better situation. The consortium hosts breakfasts quarterly. We call them the Up and Atom, ATOM breakfasts. They're in our community every single quarter, right? And our public folks from all other sectors, the folks that are retired that have been in the industry, some of our school teachers, et cetera, they show up every quarter. Today, I've been in town for 24 hours and I've had 5 people go, breakfast on the 22nd next month, right? So they look forward to that morning when we all get to go together, 100+ people or so, and they get to see each other. They get to hear about what's going on in the industry, what the consortium's doing, some updates around the laboratory or new projects, et cetera. But that excitement is being built up in the general public before we then enter going, hey, we want this specific project that's going to do, this to our roads and, gunk up the highways, and we need this many jobs, et cetera, right? So building up that public trust generally about the industry, generally about what opportunities there are, managing some of those concerns early, then bringing the project in is probably going to be your most successful pathway if you can manage it.
One thing I thought of while you were talking was I was going to have a meeting with 6 members of the Confederated Tribes of Umatilla. Our tribes are really, really important to us in Washington, and I know in Utah and Idaho as well. But I was trying to think, what can I do? What can I do to maybe just make a little tiny bit of a dent, a little bit of an impact? And I knew that they had been opposed, or the Yakima Nation had been opposed, and several of the Yakima Nation were going to be there too. I knew that they were opposed to the Horse Heaven Hills Wind Project because it's huge, and it was over 171.5 square miles on the top of our beautiful vistas in the Tri-Cities. all the way down through Prosser, which it's just huge. So I didn't know what to do. And I thought, okay, well, I think what I'll do is I'll just take this sticky note, these sticky notes. This is one of the little 3M yellow things. And I had a bare wall in my office, and I stuck 162 yellow sticky notes on the wall, and a half. I cut one in half, and I did a half to represent each square mile of this project. That would be the largest wind project in the state. And I'm not dissing wind right now. I was just trying to make a point. And then I took one green sticky note, it was 1 square mile, and I put it up top, and it said nuclear on it. And then they came in, and I didn't say a word. And then of course they asked, why do you have all these sticky notes on your wall? It's like, well, it's a funny thing. I just wanted to talk about energy density versus energy sprawl, and why it's so important that we consider that when we're talking about siting, permitting, and the best bang for our buck for this specific area. And it was that connection. And another thing is, you also have to be. You also can't try to be the smartest person in the room. I'm certainly not. I'm not a nuclear engineer, but I know there's a lot of you here that are and know everything there is to know about nuclear. But I think it plays better when you are more humble and willing to learn and open to receiving. It was Harry Truman that said, and Ronald Reagan said this too, but and I will slaughter this. It's amazing how much you can accomplish when you don't have to have the credit for doing it. If it's somebody else's idea, and if they come up with it on their own, you don't even have to put that question to them, because you've given them what you want them to think about, and they come to that conclusion themselves. It might take a little time, but you're not, those are the meaningful changes that it takes when you can just suck it up and don't pontificate and be willing to learn. And I think that's a huge key. And then working with others to not have to take the credit for any of the progress that's been made. I think it makes a big difference.
You've each had a lot of these conversations with different stakeholders and constituents, but I guess, are there any lessons learned? I mean, you each work in such different areas and states, and from your own experiences in working with these communities, what are some of the key lessons learned on what communities appreciate, what we could be doing better, where there's need for policy or support?
I'll start by maybe offering up a word as much as we can is consistency. Not only in the messaging and how to engage the community, I think that's an important part of it, but even looking at things like the variation from state to state, and we still have states that have a ban or a moratorium, or in effect a moratorium on nuclear power. And some states, give Texas credit. They want to do everything bigger and better in Texas. They want to be #1 in nuclear. So you've got this complete broad into the spectrum, but I think it sends that mixed message to broader public and community that there's something inherently, quote unquote, wrong with nuclear power when you have states that are banning it, or even countries looking worldwide versus some that are proponents of it. And I do think we need to take advantage of some of the bipartisan support, and as you said, sort of that courage and bravery from Democrats and Republicans that are in favor of it, to provide a consistent framework, a consistent regulatory process, again, as much as we can. Stuff will still vary state to state, but I think if we can get behind some of that momentum and provide that consistency, that sends a very strong message to the public, and it allows us to sort of rally around that. And then you have the grassroots efforts on maybe a project by project basis on how to engage the community. That consistency is going to be important.
I would add to that, and we call that being a good partner, right? If you show up regularly, you know who you're talking to, you can be relied on just as much as you're asking to be able to rely on these communities. It's really important. Idaho National Laboratory and the Idaho Advanced Energy Consortium know that at the basis of everything we do, we have to be good partners or the technology stops. right? This system works because everyone is involved. I'll use an example. We were designated as the nation's nuclear tech hub in 2023 when the U.S. Department of Commerce had the Tech Hubs opportunity. The Consortium administered the Intermountain West Nuclear Energy Corridor, which is currently an Idaho-Wyoming partnership nuclear tech hub. And as part of that, while we did not get one of those big checks that some of the designated tech hubs got in the first round of funding, we did get a couple of small ones. And we decided on $106 million worth of projects to kickstart some of these SMR demonstrations in the Rocky Mountain West. But one of those projects, under all the details and the bylines of the budget, was a feasibility study, specifically for the Shoshone-Bannock tribes. And they're a great partner of ours, right? They're right next door. We do a lot of work with them. And a lot of tribes, a lot of smaller communities across this nation have experienced this thing where they get asked to be a part of something when it's convenient for the bigger body or when they need to check a box or what have you. And we promised, like, we are a good partner. That's not why you're here. That's not why you're at this table. We want your community to be successful, just like we want everything else in this application to be successful. And so when we got those smaller components budget back, we prioritized still funding that feasibility study. That gets published this month. We're very, very excited to share it. So the idea of being consistent, being a good partner as best you possibly can. Obviously, if you don't get your award funded, you can't keep all of those promises or do all the projects. But then being able to take it to that next step, right? Having that conversation with that community is one thing, but then being able to produce a product that helps them understand how feasible some of these energy projects are to them is that next step of giving them that data, being able to educate on where you're headed and give them information to make decisions about themselves, right? It's not for me to dictate what should happen on the Fort Hall Reservation. It's for the leaders and the constituents of those communities to decide. And if we can help them get that information to the best of our ability, then we're not only being good partners, we're being consistent partners. We're showing up the way that they need us to, and then they can make decisions that's best for them. And hopefully that also aligns with the goals of the nuclear industry.
I thought that was so great. I don't have much to add except to say consistency, but also persistency. I think that if you're persistent, just keep going, keep going. I remember we flew, Cam Gafarian and Clay Sell with X Energy actually flew in to the Washington State Capitol to do a presentation for X Energy. There was 6 people in attendance. I was mortified, first of all. Just how could we have these people fly all the way out and nobody shows up? There was some emergency appropriations meeting or something, but that's sometimes what happens when you're in session. Your schedules change. But from that meeting, the people that were actually there at the meeting were the ones that got more personal. So they got more one-on-one attention. They got to ask more questions. Just that persistency, even though we knew the schedule was changing, we knew there might not be that many people there. It was that one meeting changed everything for the 6 people that were there and for how they chose to move forward with their ideas about nuclear. So I think persistence, just keep going, and then also those relationships, foster good relationships with those that don't see eye to eye with you, or even those that do. The collaborations, the consortiums. I had a nuclear energy caucus movie night one time, and we were showing Nuclear Now by Oliver Stone. You guys seen that? Just because Democrats like Oliver Stone, right? So I'm like, okay, come watch Nuclear Now. And so we had candy and soda, and we watched this movie, and I had 5 or 6 Democrats at my house on my couch, and Lieutenant Governor Heck had fallen asleep. He's snoring on my couch watching Nuclear Now, but he supports nuclear. I don't know if it's because of the Nuclear Energy Caucus, but now we can, those relationships really do mean everything, and they make a huge difference in just we are in a moment, aren't we? We are in a moment in history right now where we're going to be able to look back and go, that was the moment. This was the time. This is happening right now. Are we going to embrace this and run with it and and make the most of it? Or are we going to back away, be afraid, be too timid? Right now is the moment that we're in, and I'm so excited about it. And that excitement has to be contagious, and people can feel that and recognize it and go, oh, I'm interested in that. So I think it's really important, persistence, and then fostering those good relationships.
Right, we're gonna turn it over to audience questions. Have time for one or two. Get you a mic.
Morning. So we've had this big discussion about a committed order book, and we've got 11 states in this consortium and lots of other states in other consortiums. North Dakota is doing a siting study. What's going to happen when there's not enough INL to go around, right? GAIN has been super helpful in North Dakota. You call them, they show up, they've got experts, they answer your questions. My community is getting a big wind farm, 500 megawatts. It's a 20-year community-led project. We're in the final decision point on that. It's brutal for the community. It's super time-consuming. We have all these community meetings. We've got op-eds in the paper every week. Like, when GAIN's overwhelmed, how are we going to not let a bunch of communities fall through the cracks and have a really bad relationship with nuclear power where they get really opposed because a few members of the community are on the internet and they found the resources that answer their questions?
I would say that that's the designation between national support, federal support, and kind of this localized stuff that we're talking about. I was just in Atlanta last week, and there was this whole discussion. It was all like the state consortia folks. So it was like Virginia, and me, and Tennessee, and all of us sitting around the table, the us's, right, going, what are you doing differently? What are we doing? Trying to figure out who's posturing, who's ahead. We're having a good time. And there was this discussion about, well, what are we doing on a national level? How do we make this a national thing? And there was a couple very strict points about there is a role on the federal level, right? Which includes making sure that the INLs, the GAINs, those federal resources are well resourced, right? Because there isn't a reason why we couldn't reach all the communities that are seeking it with GAIN, as long as GAIN is properly resourced. But I don't think that that's where all of the effort should be, right? We really have to be thoughtful about what is the role at that level versus the role at the state level versus the role of these sometimes multi-state consortia versus the local level. And those are 4+ very different initiatives. And as difficult as that is to try to manage all at the same time, I think if we try to emphasize one primarily over any of the rest of them, something will fall through the cracks because we're trying to drive this industry so fast, so quickly.
I would add maybe one comment to that. I think they're great points, and just kind of stepping back, looking at it more broadly as far as the call it community engagement fatigue. The site selection process is a big part of successful deployment of nuclear and gaining that public trust, and that needs to be part of the equation. And understanding where, and probably more importantly, why nuclear makes sense for a given community, or maybe it doesn't. And you move on to the next, place. We do a lot of work in the siting of all kinds of power systems, and it's amazing the criteria that is used or prioritized for certain developers, certain public entities, as far as what makes a good site for transmission and substation, or wind farms, nuclear power. And so, to me, that needs to be part of the equation, and understanding how that impacts a community, and just to some extent, how accepting a community might be for whatever power system that might be going there. So that site selection process is a really critical part of the overall successful deployment.
I just have an FYI to that. Maybe you don't know, but you guys are a member of a consortium with Washington State. So it's just beginning, but we have 7, soon to be 8 states that are members of the consortium that the Nuclear Energy Caucus put together. And that was under the direction or suggestion of EFI to come together as states. So it would be Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Utah, Wyoming, Montana, did I say Alaska? Oh, and Hawaii. So that Alaska and Hawaii would be 7 and 8. So we have a call tomorrow. We've had several different phone calls. This all started from Lehigh, and Jeff Morris, I saw him here earlier, so shout out to Jeff. But everyone there on that in that consortium, it's a casual type consortium. We're just feeling it out, putting some feelers out to see who might be interested, what states want to come on board. And I know like Utah and Idaho are already involved in a somewhat of a consortium. We have a different objective. Ours is to lower the price by getting order books filled and choosing some technologies that we may want to be to go with. So we're just having those initial conversations to hopefully lower the price, and working with all of those states to get to the point where we can get all the governors together and have them meet with Secretary Moniz to discuss the potential ways we can move forward with that together. So that's already in the works and happening, and we have representatives, at least 2 from each state, and so yeah, it's going on.
Very, very simple question. What is the best resource, the best media company, the best public company, the best private company that has made the case either through their publications or video or internet, whatever, making the case that nuclear is safe? Where do you find the best research? You say, hey, is nuclear safe? You say, yeah, go to that site, go to that company, go to that. Like, who's doing the best job at answering the most simple question? Is it safe?
Yeah, the Clean Air Task Force, for Washington State, it's the Clean Air Task Force because you have the scientists, they're nonpartisan from MIT, talking about they're extremely knowledgeable. They've done a ton of casework. They've done a lot of research. They have published peer-reviewed articles written, but for Washington State and giving that environmental case, it's been the Clean Air Task Force out of Washington, D.C.
Yeah, I think that's a good. I mean, there's tons of sources. Trying to look at it from an independent perspective. The Department of Energy does a great job of putting out information. And again, I go back to that phrase of facts are your friends and letting people come to their own conclusions. But generally, when you put the facts out there about nuclear power, I think folks will come away with a favorable opinion. And DOE does a pretty good job of that. Of course, there's lots of organizations devoted to the nuclear industry that, well, yes, you could argue they are there to support the nuclear industry, but they do a good job of putting out those facts and answering some difficult questions. So, I think there's a variety of different sources. And then as we go through this, SMR, advanced reactor deployment, and the community engagement, I think there's a lot of utilities that do a great job of that and understanding the importance to the community and really boiling it down to this big, complex, infrastructure development project to how does this impact, a community of 500 people that live around a lake where this project is going to be developed. So to me, they do a pretty good job of that, storytelling, if you will, but showing that local impact. So there's a variety of sources there.
I would say the representative mentioned this Nuclear Now, the video, if you haven't watched it. What I think is the best about it is if you can get someone to pay attention and not snore on the couch for an hour and a half, like that's literally all it would take if you haven't seen it. It talks about the economics, it talks about communities. You have experts from Idaho National Lab, from the Department of Energy. I mean, I'm not going to pick between NEI and ANS. There are some brilliant people in all of those organizations that do really great work in that space to debunk some of these things. But I think that movie in particular accesses what I would consider to be the widest swath of the American public in a way that is intriguing, educational, debunk some of these myths, and quite frankly is just like pretty well done. So if you're looking for one piece to like hone in, watch Nuclear Now for an hour and a half. I actually forced my entire family on Christmas Day last year to watch it because my mom and dad couldn't tell people what I did for a living. And I said, I'm tired of this. So on Christmas Day, I locked them all in the living room and I said, we're all here. You're all watching Nuclear Now. And they were all whining. And at the end, they were like, oh, it's pretty cool. And I'm like, thank you. So,
But you have to watch the whole thing.
but yeah, it's an hour and a half. You
The
gotta
first, the first 45 minutes is about how terrible nuclear is, like all the awful things and accidents and everything. But it gets better.
One thing that I noticed was absent from this conversation was the public discussion about utility rates in nuclear.
Mhm.
How much of that is real in a public engagement strategy? The pushback on rates.
Attending some of the public meetings that I have, it is a very real question, and I don't know that there's a strong answer when you look at, take a data center that might be pulling upwards of a gigawatt that could, suck up a AP1000, reactor by itself with, a rate case type of utility approach that, could have an impact to, an individual or a residential utility bill. I mean, it's a very real question, and again, I've seen different levels of answering that question, or just pointing to public service commissions and certain discussions that are being had at a state level. But again, it's probably beyond the scope of this discussion, but it is a very real question that comes up, and you can see the concern because their power bills have gone up significantly in the last 4 or 5 years. In some cases will be projected to continue to rise.
I think it depends state to state as well. I mean, you have different policy for each state. Like in Washington, we have the Climate Commitment Act, and that makes a huge difference for those power rates. We have some programs where you can get help with for those rates. You have our hyperscalers that are taking a lot of that responsibility because they're willing to invest $300 million, $500 million in projects that will take some of that risk away. And also, well, in Washington State, it's different because you have the UTC and there's different entities where they are going to decide those rates. They're not, you can't just make your own rates. So I don't know about Idaho and Utah and others, but I know in Washington it's not that clear cut. There's a lot of reasons that go into that, and to have those conversations though is extremely important because we don't want to build out infrastructure on the backs of those who can least afford it.
All right, I'm going to wrap us up here. So please join me in thanking our last panelists. Hope, Steve, Stephanie, thank you so much for being here. This is great way to end the day.